Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so it's time to get started. My name is Deborah Lawler, and I'm the federal liaison between the WestFAST and the Western States Water Council. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted to the WestFAST tab found at the Western States Water Council's webpage at westernstateswater.org. This webinar will provide an overview of the EPA's Water Infrastructure and Financial Investment Act program. And we are going to hear from Karen Fligger. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Karen is the program manager over the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program with the EPA in Washington, D.C. Before I hand it over to Karen, I wanted to let everyone know that we will take questions at the end of today's presentation using the chat feature. So if we go along, you have questions, you can capture them in the chat feature and I'll read them at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Karen.
Great, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Karen Fligger, and I'm going to talk about opportunities to finance water infrastructure projects with the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA loans. So today I'll try to provide an overview of the program and talk about some of the flexibilities that we can offer through our loans. And then I'm going to also talk about the funding that we currently have available through the WIFIA program. So next slide. The WIFIA program was established by an act of Congress in 2014, so I think we're a relatively new program. And when we were established, we developed this mission to guide our work. So our mission is to accelerate investment in our nation's water and wastewater infrastructure. And we do this by providing long-term, low-cost loans with customized terms to credit-worthy borrowers for water and wastewater projects of national and regional significance. Next slide. So just to give a little background about the program, as I said earlier, the WIFIA program was established in 2014 as part of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, or WRDA. And this was, it was a new thing and a bit of a surprise, frankly, for EPA. So we took about 2 years to develop the WIFIA program as the first federal credit program for water infrastructure at the agency. And then beginning in FY 2017, Congress provided the first appropriations for us to actually make loans. So from 2017 to 2019, we've had 3 rounds so far, and we're just kicking off our 4th round. And so we've received over that time, we've invited 89 prospective borrowers to submit applications for loans. And so far as of today, we've closed 24 loans, totaling $5.3 billion. Together, these closed loans finance projects that have created about 25,000 jobs and served more than 22 million people from across the country. And now we received our appropriation for FY 2020, actually quite a while ago, and we received $55 million, which will allow us to lend approximately $6 billion. And we have a new portion of our program with our FY 2020 appropriation we're calling it the Swifia program, and it's a program exclusively for State Infrastructure Financing Authority borrowers, or SRF programs. So I'll talk about all that in more detail in a little bit. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you kind of a sense when we talk about those 89 projects, what we're talking about. So we are a national program, and we've had a lot of interest from across the country. So we've invited 89 projects to apply. So any state that has a dark blue is in dark blue means that at some point we've invited at least one project in that state to apply. And then the 24 closed loans are more in the, I don't know, I said it turquoise, medium color blue. And then gray states are states where we've received a letter of interest, but the project wasn't selected. And then white states are places where we haven't had any interest to date. So you can see it spread out across the country, but there are some sort of noticeable places where we haven't had a lot of interest so far. But we have had quite a bit of interest in from Western states, particularly California. So next slide. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, a federal credit program, and I just mentioned it to explain a little bit more about the appropriation process for WIFIA and how that $55 million we received as our FY20 appropriation allows us to lend so much money. So what we do is we leverage that federal appropriation. So Congress is only required under the Federal Credit Reform Act to give us enough money to cover the estimated losses. And then the remainder of the money is borrowed from and repaid to the Treasury. And, I think as you probably know, the water industry is a very conservative industry. It's very low risk. And so as a result, we can really stretch that congressional appropriation to support a much larger amount of loans. And then combined with the fact that EPA under WIFIA can only fund 49% of the project, there has to be other money involved. And so a relatively small amount of investment, so $55 million in appropriations, allows us to loan about $6 billion. And then with the matching amount, we get to about $12 billion in infrastructure investment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little more kind of an overview of the program. But one of the things I think that's really great about the WIFIA program is we have very broad eligibilities. So we can lend to a really broad array of both public and private entities for pretty much any kind of water infrastructure capital improvement project. And in terms of borrowers, we can also, as I mentioned earlier, we can lend to state infrastructure financing authorities or SRF programs. And then in terms of projects, we can fund wastewater and drinking water pipes and plants projects, so very traditional gray infrastructure projects. We can fund green infrastructure, non-poisonous pollution abatement, stormwater management, decentralized wastewater, desalination, drought prevention and mitigation, and water recycling. So we can really fund a lot of things and to a lot of different people, which is really great. Next slide, please. And just to kind of talk about this and kind of emphasize this more, this is where we are right now. So for the projects that this includes our closed loans and our projects that are in our pipeline to come in. You can see that we have projects in wastewater, in drinking water, water reuse, combined projects, which are when maybe a utility can come in with a program of projects, and so that might include projects from their CIP that are both wastewater and drinking water, or an SRF can come in and they can use it to fund a bunch of different projects from both drinking water and wastewater, and then water supply projects. In terms of kind of the size, in terms of the population served by the projects, I mean, many of our loans are for large communities. You can see that almost all of our loans are for communities over 100,000 people. But that's not to say we can't fund small communities, and we have actually closed 2 loans with small communities. And for the WIFIA program, a small community is 25,000 or less. And then we can make loans of many sizes. We do have a lower limit, which means that the smallest loan we can make is depending on the size of the community, I'll talk about it later, but we have a lower limit. We don't have an upper limit. But so far, our closed loans have ranged from $16.2 million to $699 million. So a really big range, though most of them seem to fall in that middle part, so over $100 million, but not kind of very large. And then just again, in terms of diversity, you can see we've had a lot of interest from the West. And we try to consider geographic diversity in selecting our projects, in that we are a national program. But I think, we recognize kind of the unique challenges in many of the Western states. And so I think a lot of those letters of interest have been extremely competitive. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to walk through kind of our important features of the program at a high level. So as I mentioned, the program is designed for larger projects. So there is a minimum project size. So it's $20 million for most communities. But for those small communities, those communities under 25,000, the minimum project size is 5 million, and that's the size of the project, not the size of the loan. And then, as I said earlier, there's no maximum loan amount. So far we've gone up to 699 million, but we're really only limited by our appropriation. Also, as I said, the WIFIA program can only fund 49% of the total project's costs. So all WIFIA projects must be co-funded with one or more sources. So in the past, our borrowers have used SRF loans, bond proceeds, grants, and cash for the other portion of the funding. The only real limit is that the federal contribution is limited to 80%. And I would say that most of about 3/4 of our closed loans are for the full 49% of the project costs. And in cases where they're not, it's really because the borrower requested less. So if the borrower requests 49%, we strive to give them. Have in the past always given them the full 49%. One of the other kind of big pieces is the projects must be creditworthy. So WIFIA determines this. We look at this both at the letter of interest phase and at the application phase, and we do it through both our own analysis and then by reviewing the required credit ratings from the borrowers. So I think one of the other really great features of WIFIA loans is they're long-term and they're flexible. So the loan term can be up to 35 years after substantial completion of the project, or for an SRF borrower, it's after first disbursement. And the repayment can be deferred for up to 5 years following substantial completion of the project or first disbursement for SRF borrowers. And so many of our borrowers have really taken advantage of these flexibilities and have really long tenors to their loans and have stretched, kind of started their repayment relatively far into the future. In addition, our interest rates, they're set on the date of closing based on the U.S. Treasury rate of similar maturity on the weighted average life of the loan. So far, our closed loans have seen interest rates ranging from as low as 0.83% to 3.36%. And I think as many of you know, interest rates are very low right now. So our recent loans, in the last week or so, if you closed a loan with a 30-year term, your interest rate would be about 1.3%. So I would love that interest rate on my mortgage. And so finally, this is a federal program. So, federal requirements we need to follow federal requirements, including NEPA, Davis-Bacon, American Iron and Steel, and others. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits we can offer. I think, as I mentioned, we offer a very low interest rate. And I think one of the other key things about that interest rate is it's not tied to the borrower's credit rating. So every borrower who closes on the same day would receive the same interest rate. So this can be particularly beneficial for borrowers who aren't AAA rated, who maybe are a little bit of a lower credit rating but are still credit worthy. They may get a much larger kind of savings out of a WIFIA loan because it is not tied to their credit rating. And as I mentioned also that we have the highly flexible repayment schedule with payments being deferred during construction and then post substantial completion. Repayments are often ramped up. So it doesn't have to be even once repayments start, there's the ability to sculpt those repayments over time and do some backloading. So it allows really for rate increases to be small and steady and for borrowers to reap the benefits of customer growth or inflation. So I think that our borrowers have found that extremely helpful. And then the other thing is some of our borrowers have been selected or approved for WIFIA loans have found that being selected for a loan has kind of improved their position and confidence with other lenders. And they've sometimes been able to get kind of more favorable terms on the other debt as a result. So next slide, please. So just wanted to show you kind of our 5 most recently closed loans that have happened over the past few months. So I think you can see, I think one thing you can obviously see is they really did get that very low fixed interest rate over the course of, depending on when they closed, it varies some, but all of those are great rates. And as a result, you can see that they saved a lot of money. So the savings, we calculate the savings in comparison to the bond market. And so you can see, proportionally how that our interest rate, just interest rate alone, has saved them money. And, sort of if we, that doesn't even consider maybe some of the other benefits that they received based on kind of the tenor of the long term of the loan and the way that they are scheduling their repayments. All right, next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we have just opened our annual selection round for prospective borrowers seeking loans from our FY 2020 appropriations. So that was opened on July 17th. And for this round, as I said, we have about $6 billion to lend across 2 programs. So we have approximately $5 billion for what we're now calling our base program, which is available to all of those eligible borrowers that I showed you in the earlier slide. And then we have about $1 billion to lend exclusively to state infrastructure financing authorities or SRF programs. And that's what we're calling our Swifia program. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these programs in the coming slides. And I think it is a little confusing, so I'll try to make it clear. But just so you know, there is a separate NOFA available for each of those, and they're available on our website at the address on the slide, and also were posted in the Federal Register. So next slide, please. So as I said, I think it can be a little confusing. So I'm going to quickly compare the 2 programs and then go into a little more detail about each one. So both programs are kicked off by a NOFA, which we did earlier this month, and they went out the same day. And the base program is it's the program that we've had since the beginning, and it's available to all eligible entities in the statute. So this is really the program for utilities and municipalities and private utilities, public and private, municipal governments to come into the WIFIA program. It does require submitting a more detailed letter of interest, and it is a competitive project selection process. So we look at the letters of interest that are sent in. We score them for readiness to proceed, credit worthiness, and project impact, and the top scoring projects are the ones that are invited to apply. How we do that, sort of the details of the selection process and the scoring, is outlined in the Notice of Funding Availability, and it's really designed to kind of emphasize the agency's priorities. In the base program, loans can be senior or subordinate, and it's a bespoke underwriting process. So the loan terms can be negotiated, the borrower negotiates with EPA. So the other program that's new this year are the Swifia Loans, and these have a really simplified letter of interest and selection process where all eligible prospective borrowers will be offered a loan, but it's only for state infrastructure financing authority borrowers. So basically, everyone will get, everyone who comes in will get a loan. If we get more requests than we have money for, we'll reduce the amount in a pro rata way. And then all of these loans are senior parity loans. That's the only thing we're offering under Swifia. And that because we're offering that, we are also offering a streamlined underwriting process where the borrower either accepts Swifia's standard terms, which are available on our website, or EPA accepts these the borrower's existing bond indenture. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk just a little bit again about the base program. So this is really kind of what the majority of our loans are right now. As I said, it's a competitive process, and this year we're highlighting 4 priorities. These are the same priorities that were the 2019 priorities. So it's readiness to proceed towards development, including loan closing and commencement of construction, providing for clean and safe drinking water, such as reducing exposure to lead and addressing emerging contaminants, including PFAS, repairing, rehabilitating, and replacing aging infrastructure and conveyance systems, and then water reuse and recycling as a new and innovative approach. Next slide, please. And then just to kind of provide a really high-level summary of the program, how the process is, it's a 2-step process. So project selection is what we just kicked off. For project selection, prospective borrowers have until October 15th. So it was 90 days to submit a letter of interest. And then EPA will take about 90 days to review those letters of interest and then make an announcement on project select and what projects were selected. Once a project is selected and invited to apply, they move to the project review, negotiation, and closing stage. And this is the process where the selected projects come in with a full application, EPA evaluates the application, and then the applicant and EPA negotiate the credit agreement and close the loan. So I'd say generally this phase takes about 6 to 8 months from the time EPA receives the application. It can be faster. We've had a few loans close in as few as 4 months, and it can be a lot longer. And the length of time is largely based on how much negotiation happens and how quickly things are turned back to EPA. So if we make a comment, how quickly we get a response, and then how much kind of negotiation needs to happen. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the base program loan process. And then next slide. The Swifia loan program is, only for SRF programs to come in. I guess I should say it's only for state infrastructure financing authorities, which includes the state entity that is receiving the capitalization grant, and any other agencies is otherwise carrying out the requirements of the Clean Water Act and Safe Water Act authorization for the SRF programs. So I think the key there is that the grant might be received by a state environmental agency, and then the loans are administered by a finance authority, and both of those entities are eligible to apply for a Swifia loan. So under this program, EPA is offering senior parity loans that are 49% of the Swifia project. So the Swifia project is all the loans that are being requested as part of that are being included in the request for credit assistance. And then, and as I said earlier, there's kind of 2 options. We can either adopt the existing indenture, or the state can use our standard terms. So there's no negotiation in this process. So next slide. So on the next slide, you can see that like the base program, the Swifia loan process is also 2 steps. So there is a project selection process, but it's not competitive. So everyone will get a loan. So for that reason, and because of the simplified letter of interest, while the NOFA went out the same day, July 17th, the letter of interest submission deadline is a month earlier, so it's September 15th. And then our evaluation process is also, we anticipate being significantly faster. It's our first time doing it, so definitely estimating. And then we hope to invite selected borrowers for Swifia by the end of the year. And then just like the base program, the selected borrowers, which will be everyone who comes in, will move to the application process. And similarly, they need to if you're selected, you need to submit a longer application. We'll evaluate that application. But since there is no negotiation, it's really just a documentation process to come up with a term sheet and loan agreement that both sides need to get their approvals, and then we can close the loan. So we hope it's a faster process, and that it'll be more like 3 to 6 months from the time we receive the application. So next slide. So just we do a lot of outreach. So I just kind of want to talk about what opportunities that you have as a state if you're interested, or if you have if you know of a community that's interested in coming in for WIFIA. So we have upcoming outreach events. We have two webinars coming up that are specifically about the base program NOFA. They're the exact same webinar presented twice. And we'll go into a lot of detail. I just realized that one was yesterday. I'm sorry about that. So we have one coming up, and we'll go into a lot of detail in as to kind of into the NOFA and what we expect in the letter of interest, and what we do in the evaluation process, and how we run that competitive process. So I encourage people to register for that. We will also post the one that happened yesterday, a recording of that, on our website soon. Next slide, please. So in addition to the webinars that we do, we also are happy to meet with prospective borrowers. We used to do a lot of in-person meetings, but now we're moving to a lot of video conferences or phone calls. And prospective borrowers can ask clarifying questions about the project selection process. We can learn about the project. We can't provide technical assistance. So, prospective borrowers are always welcome to reach us directly. So we use a centralized mailbox, WIFIA at EPA.gov for those requests. We also have in the past had states or other federal agencies help facilitate those meetings with us, and we're happy to sort of include others in those conversations to figure out kind of what's the best option for a community. Next slide, please. And then just our website, we hope it's informative. So we have a lot of general information about the program and the regulations and statutes that created us. We also have all the application materials, particularly for the base program. We have a lot of, we have some extra tools to help. So we have the form for the letter of interest, but we also have a checklist that we hope will help people as they fill out the form. And then we have a sample letter of interest and a sample financial pro forma. And then we also have a really detailed program handbook, template term sheets for both the base program and the Swifia program, and more information on federal compliance. So next slide. So I think that wraps up my presentation for today, but this is my contact information if anyone wants to reach out to me directly. We also do have a newsletter of announcements. So we announce when we have funding available, when we close loans. So I'd encourage people who are interested in following the program to sign up. And I think with that, I can answer if any questions have come in.
Great, thank you, Karen. I'm gonna get out of here. Okay, so we're opening it up for questions. So if you want to use your chat, I'm available to read those aloud. Okay. Well,
Hey, this is Roger Gorky. I'm on my phone, so I can't figure out the chat thing.
okay.
I guess, Karen, thanks for doing this. I have two questions. One is related to Swifia, and that's for the infrastructure financing entities within a state, not just for state infrastructure, right? So that would be like for an SRF to bolster the funds within their SRF versus a state building water or wastewater infrastructure, right?
Right, that's correct. So Swifia is specifically, yeah, I should have maybe been clearer. Yeah, Swifia is specifically for SRF programs to kind of to leverage their program. So in lieu of going to the bond market, they could borrow instead from the Swifia program. States also are eligible entities to borrow for eligible water infrastructure projects. So a state could apply for a WIFIA loan under the base program if they were looking for financing for a infrastructure project. So both types of things are eligible. It's just sort of where do they fall?
Right. All right. And then the second question is there, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but federal agencies are not eligible for a WIFIA loan, or are they? So can, say, Bureau of Reclamation apply for a WIFIA loan to help with some of their infrastructure? Is that allowed? And if not, is there discussions about a way to allow federal infrastructure agencies to be able to receive loans?
Yeah, so that's a pretty complicated question right now. So technically, under the statute, federal entities are eligible for WIFIA loans. But under the Federal Credit Reform Act, there are some issues with the way the subsidy piece of it would work. So effectively, even a federal agency could not borrow. Because we wouldn't be able to stretch the money the way, so we wouldn't be able to stretch the money in the same ways. There would really not be kind of funds available for that, I guess is the short answer. There's a kind of even more complicated answer. There's an exercise that we are working through that we needed to work through with OMB and Treasury in order to release our NOFA, that talks about kind of federal involvement in a project and federalization of a project. And we have a Federal Register notice kind of explaining that out right now. And OMB will be more involved in our selection. So we're still kind of figuring that piece out. But I think the short answer of kind of can a federal agency come in, I think in reality, while they're listed on the eligible list, I think the reality is that we would never actually be able to make that loan.
So Karen, this is Deborah Lawler. Just a twist on that last question and answer. So Reclamation has a program for wastewater reuse projects, Title 16.
Yeah.
I think Reclamation covers 25% of the cost, so 75% of the cost goes to the project sponsor. So could you combine the WIFIA with the Title 16 up to that 80%? I think you mentioned there's some sort of 80% number.
Yes. So, right. So the 80% is the maximum amount of federal involvement in the project.
Right.
So, I will, yeah. So I think that we, under the statute, in terms of being able to combine those, I think the answer is yes, especially if the recipient is a municipality or a kind of a utility. I think the question we have is we do have a new process this year where we're looking at this. I'm not coming up with the right words because I was not involved, but we're looking at sort of the federal involvement or in a project. And so OMB will be looking at that, and we haven't run this process yet. So that's my only hesitation is that, I think we think from a statutory perspective, that is eligible, but that doesn't consider this new process that we haven't completed yet. So I think if there's a project in mind, it's a lot easier to talk about it on like a specific project basis. And we have been working, I mean, we have an existing MOU with Bureau of Reclamation and have been working to try to figure out how to better kind of leverage our funding sources to get these projects implemented. So we would, like to see that move forward.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any other questions out there?
Well, this is Roger. I'll add something else in it. I think you might have touched on it, Karen. But one of the things that I thought was is one of the I mean, there's lots of great parts of the WIFIA program, but when a project isn't selected, the kind of debriefing that you do with a project that isn't selected, so that they might be able to be more selectable, if that's a word, in the future. I think that is a fantastic part of what you guys do as part of running the program in total. So I don't know if you mentioned that, but I just wanted to make sure it did get mentioned and highlighted, so that there's no risk in applying other than the sheet of paper that you send in but you do get a debrief on the way out if you're not selected. And I think that's all right. So revise and correct my statements. But
no, that's all correct. So absolutely. So one of the things that we hope is helpful is that, we do a competitive process, and depending, it's always hard for us we always have like a game where we try to guess how many people are going to come in, how much they're going to ask for. I am always woefully wrong. But you never know how competitive a round is going to be. It's a combination of how much funding is available and who else comes in and what types of projects. So we have in the past had to turn away, good projects. And so we do a debrief process for anyone who wants one. And we talk through kind of things they could do to make their letter of interest stronger. A lot of times it seems like the project, it's just really about readiness, like how soon is the project can come in. And so in those cases, a lot of times it's just like you'll be more competitive in the next year. But we do a process, and we've had a lot of good success with the people who've come back come back in a second time. They're almost always selected the second time they come in. So I think and we do encourage people, we really encourage people to ask us questions and to reach out to us. We try to be extremely responsive, both in terms of a debrief, but any time during the process. So
that would be a great statistic, that of those that didn't get that weren't selected, and that go through your debrief process and then come back with a stronger, that 90%, 80% are. Not saying not saying that they'd be guaranteed, of course, but
right.
that ongoing and open communication is extremely valuable in creating a WIFIable, I'm just creating all sorts of words, WIFIable project moving forward.
Okay. Well, I haven't received any questions or comments in the chat, so I think that wraps it up.
Great.
So
well, thank you for including me.
You bet. I want to thank everyone for joining, and I especially want to thank you, Karen, for all your time and effort with this webinar.
No problem. Bye.
And it is recorded and will be on the Water Council website under the WestFAST tab. So Karen, if you wanted to maybe point people, I'm sure you guys do so many other things, it might, you might not need to, but we'll definitely play up that it's on the WestFAST site.
Okay. I think I have a comment here. Let me look real quick. Someone's asking, could you explain how the risk works here? You mentioned Congress appropriated $55 million for that?
Yeah, so basically we do a risk analysis for kind of part of our creditworthiness review, both at letter of interest and application, is to try to determine what the sort of estimated, like a loan loss reserve basically that we need to set up for each loan. So if a loan is riskier, then we have to have a larger percentage of the loan. So usually, we kind of say on average it's 1%. So if, we make a $100 million loan, we set aside 1% of that amount. And that's what we take from the appropriation. And then the rest of the money comes from Treasury. So we look at different elements of risk, depending on kind of, whether kind of what the structure is, what the revenue pledge is. So are they pledging, taxes? Are they pledging rates? Are they pledging, is it some sort of new, sort of a new source, and they're looking at anticipated customers versus, existing customers. So that's how we calculate risk. And then there's a model that we use that is tied into a model that OMB uses for all federal credit programs. And then we come up with a number, and then we have to have that number approved by OMB in order to actually close the loan.
So a follow-on, is that like, hold on just a second. Is that like a loan insurance?
I don't know. I guess it depends how you think of it. Yeah, it's just kind of like a reserve in case of default. I don't know. It's very unique to federal credit, and I apologize, I'm not an expert on sort of this piece of it in terms of explaining it, but yeah, it's just basically, but it is based on risk. So something that for example, sometimes projects in transportation, they might be riskier because if you're doing a toll road and there's already an existing road to get from point A to point B, and now there's a new toll road that might get you there faster, but you're kind of trying to model what the tolls will be, and you don't know. There's a lot more uncertainty. But if you're kind of rehabilitating an existing water system, you know what your customer base is. Those people are going to keep paying, and so you have a very strong likelihood that the ability to repay is just far less risky, which is why ours is so low.
And if you're doing a water recycling project, that presumably opens up potentially new customers for you to be able to add to your repayment stream. Those types of things, right?
Right, potentially, yeah. So, but a lot of it is, is it backed by taxes? And then doesn't really matter. It's not necessarily tied to other things. So there's a lot of factors, but just sort of in general, you almost never see defaults in the water industry. So as a result, the multiplier is very high for us.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's it then.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thanks.